Barnstable This Morning. On this Tuesday morning, I'm Sarah Colvin, and joining me live on the phone, I welcome Cape and Island State Senator Dan Wolf. Senator Wolf, good morning.
Sarah, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, and yourself?
Good. I hope this is a harbinger of the winter we're going to have.
I hope so too. I hope so too. You know, you never know. We thought it was going to be mild last year, but that didn't happen. So I'm just going to enjoy these days while they last.
Well, statistically, a warmer November usually means a warmer winter.
Okay, good. All right.
Statistics. So we will wishful think.
I'm going to hold you to that. we'll talk again in February.
Exactly. Remind me of that during a blizzard in February.
I will indeed. So, Senator, wanted to talk a little bit today about housing, but first, again, wanted to thank you for joining CCYP and being the keynote speaker during the speaker series a couple weeks ago. I think that was a great event and really some interesting topics that you brought up during your address.
Well, Sarah, it's so nice to see you out at so many of these events, too, that you're as engaged as you are on behalf of the station. So it's great to see you that morning.
Thank you. It's important to get out there. And again, it's an important thing to talk about those housing issues, because I think as we look towards the future, you know, Dan, we really need to think about different options for looking at solving some of the various housing issues that we've got going on here on Cape Cod.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Sarah. A couple days after that, I was the keynote speaker at a Chatham Chamber of Commerce event. And what I heard loud and clear from the business community in Chatham is exactly the same thing we're hearing all over the Cape, which is the biggest issue is housing for their employees, for people, you know, seasonal employees, but also year-round employees who are trying to get to relocate to the Cape. And certainly that's been my experience at Cape Air. When we find somebody who we want to hire, the first two questions they always ask are, what are the schools like if they have children? And then they look into the housing market, and it's a wake-up call, that's for sure.
Indeed, and I think we certainly have some unique challenges here on Cape Cod with, you know, number one, the housing prices, and of course our second homeowner market is huge because there are many people who can't afford to buy those higher ticket homes, which drives the price up. And then of course we have some zoning regulations that keeps us from building some denser affordable housing. So there's really so many things that we have to look at, I think, when we're thinking about those housing issues.
Well, as you know, I have a zoning bill that's in the legislature now, Senate Bill 122, which does address some of the zoning and some of the approvals. I think it would facilitate the process for developers who want to build. So I certainly would urge the listeners to look into Senate Bill 122 and weigh in on that. It's already had its hearing, and my hope is that this term, unlike the last two terms, we'll be able to actually move that bill out of the committee and on its way. So that's, you know, on the housing, on the zoning and development end, that's something we can look at. But Sarah, as you and I have discussed in the past, and as you just pointed out, one of the reasons housing is so challenging for middle income earners and for the workforce that we need, teachers, public safety people, service industry folks, is because the real estate here is so prime. And that's a resource we have, and it's actually good news because if you want to compare this with places out in western Massachusetts where property values are low, they look at us and say, gee, they're lucky down on the Cape. They have high real estate values. And the question is, are we leveraging and are we using that to the degree that we can in order to help, you know, really help with the challenge of housing for our workers here?
Indeed, and so let's talk a little bit about that question. I know that obviously our Community Preservation Fund comes out of an extra tax that goes on real estate taxes, and that is used for a variety of things, including the development of affordable housing. But I think what you're proposing is something that takes a step further than what the CPC does.
Well, I'm suggesting that we take a look at is there a way to tap into some of that value that's here on the Cape without hurting the very people that we're trying to help. So whatever we do moving forward, we don't want to have an adverse impact on folks that are in the middle income and lower income end of the spectrum. So the question is, and it's a town-by-town basis, since the towns are the ones who levy the real estate, is there a way to have a charge or a surcharge on the very top-end properties, again, without having unintended consequences on the people we're trying to help, that would then create a fund, and what I'm suggesting is a regional housing trust fund that we could then use both to help people with down payments, and it would be, again, an interest-free loan for the period of time they're in the house. So when they leave the house, they would pay that back into the trust. But that would help people get into homes to buy and also subsidized rentals for those who want to rent. And, it's an idea that has been kicked around for a few years. I don't think it ever seriously gets traction because I think people don't want to see taxes go up at all for anybody. But while I understand that, if you look at the real estate taxes in Massachusetts, the towns that I represent on the Cape are almost all the lowest real estate tax by rate in the Commonwealth. So people around the Commonwealth look at us and say, gee, why are you coming to the state to solve this when you're not doing what you can in your own backyard? And I think there's a legitimacy to that.
Right, and certainly I think anytime we talk about raising taxes, it ruffles some feathers. But when we look at some other roadblocks to kind of finding ways to fund whether it's subsidies or it's help with some down payment loans, what are some other roadblocks that you see?
Well, I mean, the big thing is the financial roadblock. Hang on one second.
Oh, sure.
The big thing is the financial roadblock because while we can talk about
the zoning issue all we want, it's still going to come down to economics, and it's still going to get down to the cost of housing here. So while we're working on the zoning end and trying to facilitate more development, we have to be realistic that even as we do that, somebody making $10 or $15 or $20 an hour is still going to have a real challenge buying housing here on the Cape. So the two are not mutually exclusive. We need to actually be working on both. But I guess the question I would lay out there to the listeners and to you is if it's not raising funds through some kind of mechanism that I'm suggesting, and again, I'm only suggesting doing some kind of assessment on very top-end properties. If we don't do it that way, I guess my question is, how are we going to do it? How are we going to help get people into housing that we depend on here? Again, the teachers, the public safety, the service workers. These are people that we need to and rely on here on the Cape, healthcare workers for an aging population. So, I think we have to have a realistic conversation about that. Otherwise, we're just going to keep walking around this issue and kicking it, but never really doing anything about it.
Indeed, and then I think there's that middle ground too of folks. I think particularly the young professionals who may be priced out of affordable housing, who make too much money to qualify for say like the Village Green apartments in Hyannis, but can't afford to make that down payment on a home. So where is there anything that can be done to kind of bridge that gap?
Well, Sarah, I actually think that's really the people that we're talking about. There are at the low end some resources that are available, but for those middle income earners, the ones that you're talking about, they make too much to really qualify for significant help, and yet they don't make enough nearly without that help to be able to stay and live here. And those are the people that we need to really be focused on. One of the specific suggestions, Sarah, would be take a look at any one of our towns. If you look at Barnstable. The opportunity is there under current law, and I know Barnstable already does this to a degree, to exempt the low-end properties or exempt up to a certain amount. So, for example, let's say the town decided to exempt real estate tax up to $250,000 of value. If you had a $250,000 home, you'd pay nothing. But above the $250,000, we would raise the rate significantly, so that if you own $1 million house, you would be paying real estate tax on the $750,000 of it that's above $250,000, and you would probably pay a little bit more than you're paying now. And I think that does two things. You and I have discussed the wealth and income inequality issue, which is continuing to grow and have huge impacts here on the Cape and beyond. But it also would allow us to have the capacity to help fund some of the projects and some of the people that we're trying to help here.
Without a doubt. So again, as we've talked, there's so many different moving parts to this, whether we're talking about changing the zoning regulations, whether we're talking about creating a more favorable job market here on the Cape, or whether we're talking about, again, that the income equality, certainly so many moving parts. But I think advancing the conversation and I think everybody getting on the same page is important to moving this issue forward.
Sarah, let me be real clear about a couple of those things, because it's almost obstructionist if we solve none of them but don't address, solve some of them but don't address the others. If we do the zoning, and the towns really get aggressive about zoning, so-called accessory apartments and apartments over shops, and all of the tools that we know are out there in the smart growth tool chest, if you will. Even if we do that, that's not going to be enough in and of itself to address this. So there needs to be a source of revenue. There needs to be a stream of revenue to help fund this, because even if we change zoning, it's not going to put a downward pressure on the cost of housing here. It might open the door for more housing, but supply and demand in a traditional sense isn't going to work here because there's just not enough potential supply. It's not like we're talking about Kansas, where we can just build and build and build away from our metropolitan areas. We're boxed in by the geography and we're boxed in by the national seashore. So we're going to need, realistically, to have a fund or have access to funds. And again, as I pointed out, two factors that people need to keep in mind is, one, our existing real estate tax rates are the lowest in the Commonwealth here on Cape Cod. And two, we have some of the highest value real estate in our own backyard that is a resource to help fund this. And no one in government ever likes to talk about raising more revenue, but I would like to hear someone explain to me how we're going to really address this and tackle it if we don't raise some revenue regionally, because I can tell you it's not going to come from the state. There's not a lot of sympathy across the state for what they don't perceive as a problem, but they perceive as an opportunity that we're simply not taking advantage of down here on the Cape.
Absolutely. Well, Senator, I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk with us here on Barnstable This Morning, and I look forward to our next conversation in a couple of weeks. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy this beautiful weather.
Thanks, Sarah. Controversial subject, so I'd love to hear listeners weigh in with what their thoughts are.
I would as well, for sure. We'll see if we can get some feedback from our audience, and I'll send that over to you. We can talk about it more next time we chat. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
All right, bye-bye. Cape and Island State Senator Dan Wolf. Again, what do you think about the housing issues? You can email us at btm@town.barnstable.ma.us. I'm going to send you out to look at that pristine morning.